exploring youth culture of the 60s to be involved with these things. This was during a time of great social upheaval for other reasons, and the end product of that historical episode was the complete suppression of the study of psychedelic drugs, and in my opinion, to the great detriment of the development of psychology. I feel that potentially psychedelic drugs could be for psychology what the telescope became for the science of astronomy. The problem with the psychedelics is that they dissolve cultural programming and hence inherently have a political charge about them. You see, culture is the product of the unperturbed human mind. The human mind, unperturbed through the medium of language, erects institutions and social structures into which it then secretes itself and sort of lives in a private Idaho. A psychedelic drug will dissolve these linguistic and cultural assumptions. It is a perturbation of the mind, and the perturbed mind is a mind in the act of rediscovering the nature that lies outside of culture. So this tension between cultural values and what we might call, for want of a better word, reality, creates a tension between institutions and the users of these substances.
It's as if our culture, if I understand you right, acts as a filter between our minds and direct experience of reality, and the drugs somehow blow away that crust of culture and allow more of a direct, a Gnostic experience.
That's right, and the business of culture, any culture, is to perpetuate its cultural models. And if the hallucinogenic plants have not been integrated into the cultural model, then they are definitely seen as dangerous forces for an unpredictable sort of social change. Mm-hmm. Now, if the hallucinogenic plants have been integrated into the cultural model, this is not then a problem, and this is the case with shamanism. Shamanism is the culturally sanctified institution of inner exploration via psychoactive plants. Where psychoactive plants are not present, shamanic institutions tend to become vitiated, to rely on ritual or ordeals or other methods of eliciting these ecstatic states. But to my mind, and this is a great argument which rages in anthropology, to my mind, and I'm in agreement with Wasson here, the hallucinogenic plants are the sine qua non for an active shamanism.
For authentic.
An authentic shamanism. That's right. Now, Mircea Eliade, who is the great commentator on shamanism, took an entirely different point of view and said that reliance on what he called narcotics was a decadent phase of shamanism. But if we examine Eliade's personal history, I think it can be clearly seen that this was simply the cultural myopia of a European scholar in the great 19th century model. You know?
Sort of still under the sway of a Victorian sense of morality.
Yes, sort of taking the superior point of view that, well, these are primitive people, surely our greater epistemological sophistication puts us in a position to judge them.
You have the same controversy, don't you, now, within the Hindu tradition, where many gurus say no drugs and are denying, I suppose, the tradition of the Rig Veda, which we spoke of earlier.
That's absolutely correct. The Mahabharata, which is the central core text of late Reformed Hinduism, explicitly forbids mushrooms to the Brahmin class. They are a forbidden food. But in ethnography, we're taught that a taboo usually indicates a previous involvement and fascination. And in fact, the early Hinduism of the Vedic phase was definitely more analogous to the hallucinogenic shamanism of the Amazon basin than it is to the extremely stratified Hinduism of modern India.
Do you find the use of drugs of this type, hallucinogenic drugs, in the tantric traditions, the traditions that deliberately use taboos in order to inculcate higher states of awareness?
Yes, well, when you go to India, you discover that the one thing that is not stressed in Hinduism as it is exported to the West is the immense reliance on cannabis. Hashish, ganja, is the staple of these sadhus. This is a fact of their daily life, that they are relying on this for a constantly reinforced contact with the transcendental dimension.
You know, I think it's interesting how you referred earlier to the shamanistic religions as being the ones that really have sanctified the use of these drugs for religious purposes. And yet we find in our Western tradition, Christianity has come and in effect labeled these sorts of things as diabolic. For example, drugs, I believe, were used amongst various witchcraft groups that were persecuted by the church.
That's right. However, the church was concerned that the magic of the witches be seen as real, number one, and number two, entirely caused by the agency of the devil himself. And so the church downplayed the operational role that plants had in inducing these states, because after all, if the devil cannot lead you astray without the use of plants, why, what kind of devil is it? So in our own historical tradition, there is a curious blindness to the efficacy of hallucinogenic plants.
I have heard, for example, that the old story of witches using toad skins in their brews, that there's a drug called bufotenine, which is a hallucinogenic that comes from the skin of toads.
Well, there was excitement about bufotenine in the mid-60s. It was later shown to be non-psychoactive. However, since then, toads have been found which do secrete DMT-like compounds, and it's fairly clear that the cauldron chemistry of the witches, which relied on datura, hellebore, monkshood, henbane, these sorts of plants, was a powerful visionary chemistry. Although these compounds, the tropane alkaloids that occur in those plants, tend to be more deliriants and confusants than what I call the classical psychedelic compounds, which are more the tryptamines and the beta-carbolines. There are many chemical compounds in nature which are psychoactive, but a much narrower spectrum of these compounds are truly what we call psychedelic or mind manifesting.
Now, other than the obvious spiritual and religious implications which we see again and again in different cultures, even I suppose we should mention the Native American church and their use of peyote. What are the other kinds of cultural developments that we can trace to the use of these drugs?
Well, I think the most profound cultural development is it is possible to make the case that language itself is an ability that was coaxed out of an evolving primate species by virtue of the fact that there were hallucinogenic plants in the diet of that creature. You see, psilocybin has been shown in low doses to actually increase visual acuity. Well, at the stage of evolution where human beings encountered psilocybin mushrooms, we were essentially baboon-like pack-hunting hordes of veldt-living creatures in Africa. In that situation, a compound which increases visual acuity will give a tremendous adaptive advantage to the animals that are including it in their diet. And those animals not including it in their diet will be quickly eliminated by the process of natural selection from the evolutionary scenario. So it's possible to argue that this mind-manifesting quality of the psychedelics actually conferred an evolutionary advantage on certain primates who then were able to bootstrap themselves to higher and higher states of reflective self-awareness. This may lie behind the very early coincidence of cattle, goddesses, and mushrooms in the apparent obsessions of early man as reflected by the cave paintings on the Algerian plateau and in southern France and Spain. We always find the notion of the mystery circa 18,000 years ago connected with the idea of cattle, and we always find the cattle connected with the notion of the great goddess. Now, it may be that the hidden and third member of this trinity was a hallucinogenic mushroom of some sort.
We've got only about 2 minutes left, but I wonder what the connection, I don't quite see it, between the mushroom, the cattle, and the goddess.
The mushrooms grow in the manure of the cattle. When the hunting packs of early primates followed along behind the cattle, they inevitably encountered the mushroom, ate it, had their visual skills thereby increased, bred more readily, therefore, and survived more easily than their non-mushroom eating cousins. And so the eating of mushrooms and the development of higher aspects of consciousness, including self-reflection, were thereby enforced, leading to the conclusion that it was actually a symbiotic relationship between early primates and these hallucinogenic plants that laid the basis for the appearance of what we call human beings.
Well, Terence McKenna, this is a very interesting discussion. You seem to be suggesting that our evolution, I suppose, from the animal kingdom into the human kingdom itself was catalyzed or triggered by our encounter with these hallucinogenics. And
yes, we are an ape with a symbiotic relationship to a mushroom, and that has given us self-reflection, language, religion, and all the spectrum of effects that flow from these things.
yeah, and one can only wonder how these hallucinogens might affect our future evolution as well.
They have brought us to this point, and as we make our relationship to them conscious, we may be able to take control of our future evolutionary path.
Terence McKenna, thank you very much for being with me.
It was a pleasure.
For me too. And thank you very much for being with us.